Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is the latest episode of the Hard Compound Live. A big welcome to you all. My name's Rich, and I run and operate the Hard Compound. We're a one-stop shop for all things motorsport. We can be found on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on YouTube. We put 3 articles out per day on Facebook, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Morning, lunchtime, and evening here in the UK. These take the form of any breaking news, any like race reviews, race previews, throwbacks on this day, birthday, livery reveals, and anything else we can shake a stick at, really. We cover everything from F1 to touring cars, IndyCar to World Endurance Championship, bikes, rallying, and all that good stuff. So do search for the Hard Compound on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, and come along and join in the fun. As you might have noticed, we do live video interviews just like this one. And just like this one, they are broadcast on our Facebook, our Twitter, and our YouTube channel. They're automatically saved, so you can watch them back in the video section on Facebook and in the live section on YouTube. We've done over 100 of these, which is pretty amazing. We've had some terrific guests, and I'm not going to name them all, so don't panic. But we have had some guests from all across the motorsport spectrum. Lots of the British touring car grid, past and present guys like Steve Soper and Rob Gravitt and Graham Good and Frank Sittner and Jason Plato, Anthony Reid, Gabriele Tarquini, Ivan Muller, Fabrizio Giovanardi, Tom Coronel, Andy Prio, etc., etc. We've had racers from the F1, IndyCar, and sports car world, namely the honour and the privilege of speaking to Mr. Mario Andretti, whose birthday it is today. Happy birthday, Mario. We've also spoken with Mr. Hans Stuck, with John Watson and Jackie Ickx and Dick Bennett and many others. We've spoken with the likes of Derek Warwick, Stephanie Hansen, David Brabham, Mark Blundell, Eddie Chivo, Raul Boisel, Roberto Guerrero, Carl Wendlinger, etc., etc. Now, all of those that I've just mentioned have raced in F1 and they've raced in sports cars and prototypes, which takes us very nicely onto our guest this evening. He's driven F1 machinery and he's driven GTs and he's just fresh off the back of second place at Daytona. Most unfortunate that it wasn't a win. So we're going to bring him in right now. Very, very talented driver, someone I'm a big fan of, and someone that I collared at the Autosport show, but he's not holding it against me. So without any further ado, please join me in extending a very, very warm welcome to Jack Aitken.
Hello.
And there he is. Jack, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, not bad. I've had a long day heading out to Wales to do a shoot. We're talking about it off camera, not off camera, but pre-live camera. So I had to do a very quick turnaround to get ready for the podcast. On the way home, I was given a little bit of a wake-up call because about 300 meters before my home, a deer ran out across the road. I was testing my reactions, so I'm waking up.
Wow, that's the pre-season reaction test you don't really want, isn't it? Goodness me. Yes, you didn't tell me that off air. Wow. So, I'm glad the deer made it. I'm glad you made it. So yeah, and thank you very much for coming on and having a chat. And also thank you for recognizing me at Autosport. That was very weird, but it was very cool. So, yeah, thank you for the chat there. It was good speaking to you there. Right.
Pleasure. No, it's good to see familiar faces in the crowd.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good crowd. And the show got a bit of stick from certain motorsport fans across the world. I thought it was pretty good. I was there Thursday and Saturday, and I thought it was really good. There's good variety of cars and people like you up on stage. And yeah, it was good, wasn't it?
I'm not plugged into the motorsport underworld. I didn't hear about the grumble. Yeah, I thought it was good. It was nice. It's been a while since I've been to the Autosport show. The last time I went before this year was 2015, because that was the last time that I was a McLaren Autosport Award finalist. Well, it's not the McLaren Autosport Award anymore. It's the Aston Martin BRDC Award, I think.
Yes.
And back then, they still got all of the finalists to come and do as they do now, interviews, but also the live action show, which is actually quite a lot of fun. But yeah, it's been a while, and it was good because it looks like it's as busy as ever as I remember it, and lots of families out. It's always nice to see younger crowd out getting involved, and next generation of fans and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was good to see. Yeah, there was a good spread of ages and a good spread of people from across the motorsport spectrum, I suppose. And you mentioned about the Aston Martin award. We've got Joseph Loke won that this year, and it looks like he's going to be on the way up. So yeah, very impressive.
Yeah.
Very impressive young man. Caught up with him as well. So good stuff.
I'm getting to the age now where I don't know the names of all of I don't recognise all of the contestants going into the award, which is a signal that I'm definitely getting out of touch and old compared to previous years when I was, a bit more on it. But no, they're all very impressive young guys now coming through, and girls.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, okay. Well, just before we crack on, I just want to say hello to some folks in the comment section. Oliver and Mike and James and Chris and everyone else. Hello, folks. Thank you for tuning in. If you've got any questions or comments, pop them in. We'll see them in real time, and we'll try and work them in as best we can. So we've got quite a lot to get through. You've done quite a lot in a short space of time, and I guess the best place to start is at the start. Where did your interest and love of motorsport come from, and how did it all start for you?
Started like a lot of others with karting. Probably stems more from me. I was quite scrawny and small as a kid, and I'm still quite scrawny as an adult. So that hasn't changed much.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, not blessed with body for rugby, say. So no, I wasn't very good at many sports at school, like football, rugby, etc. But I was quite competitive, like a lot of kids. And Michael Barnes is right. They did always put me in the bin. That was their favourite trick. The first kart team I joined. When you're only 20 kilos, you're very easy to chuck around. So I went karting for a birthday party, I think it was, and because I was half the size of most of the other kids, I actually was pretty all right. Where I thought I was extremely talented, and begged my parents to go back. And it kind of grew from there. Took it kind of casually for a long time, and I don't think we looked any further than it was a nice weekend out, and I loved it. I loved the sport, but also the social side of it. Like, it's all just a group of kids running wild on the weekend and then playing in go-karts every couple of hours. That's basically what a race weekend was. So it was mega. And slowly worked my way up the different series and ranks. When I was a sort of young teenager, I started taking it a bit more seriously and started getting those dangerous ideas in my head of, I could make a job out of this, because nothing was really grabbing me at school. Parents were very adamant that I finish school and do my A-levels and all of that, which people in the UK know very well, but finished my school up to the age of 17, 18. I then bargained with them that I could take a gap year and not go to uni, to focus on racing for a little bit. Gap year became a bit longer than a year, but luckily the racing went pretty well, and that kind of is the short story that brought us to here. But my family's always loved cars. No racing history, but my mum and dad are both petrol heads. My brother was racing in karts as well and was very good. He was top 5 in Europe in his class as well. So we all share that passion and watched F1 and Top Gear since as early as I can remember.
So it was always there. It was all in the house, and obviously, after that party, and you took to it pretty well. I mean, I've got here that you started down at Buckmore Park, which obviously great place for many people have started at Buckmore Park, like Johnny Herbert and guys like that started there, and it was saved recently. I think there was talk of it maybe shutting down, so that's excellent. But the karting thing, it's obviously there's so many that have started, like so many races that have started in karts. It's either that or on 2 wheels. It seems to be where people start. apart from Rick Parfitt Jr., who raced lawnmowers against the members of Queen, which obviously you would do, wouldn't you?
Of course.
We've all done that.
Yeah.
But it's a great proving ground, isn't it? I mean, from the age of 6 or 7 or even younger, right up to when you can move on into cars, it's a great proving ground, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's it is the perfect way to get into it. At the same time, like you want it to be a balance. Like you don't want to take it too seriously, I think, too early, because I think sadly the sport is like a lot of sports. It's not just racing, but a lot of kids now trying to bring a lot of the professionalism that we see in the higher parts of the sport down to really a beginner level and grassroots sport, which not sure is really the best thing. I think you should just be able to enjoy it and really just, see if you like it or not, and just have a fun time with it to begin with. And I was lucky to have that when I was growing up. Like I say, didn't really entertain taking it any further other than the weekend that was next on the calendar. And I think there's a lot to be said for just letting kids be kids and not getting a driver coach, not getting the best equipment, putting them in a really professional team, not shaming people who do that, because some kids are all for it and they want to go all guns blazing straight away. But a lot of kids are just being kids, want to have fun.
Yeah, I think that has to be the start point for anything in life, doesn't it? You've got to do it because you enjoy it, and it's got to be fun. And once that starts to wobble a bit, then you need to look at it. But yeah, and obviously you, as you said, you worked your way up. You went up through Super One and Buckmore Park Summer Championship, things like that. And I've got it was around. Was it around 2012? Obviously, you'd already started to think about those dangerous thoughts, as you say, making a career out of it and things like that. It was around 2012 that you started going into cars and things like that, with something that I must admit I wasn't familiar with until I did a little bit of digging, the Dunlop Intersteps Championship. Now,
yeah, it wasn't long for this world, sadly.
I had a quick look, and it was measured in months, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But what kind of cars were they? Because they look kind of like smallish F4 type wing.
They're Formula BMW cars.
Okay.
Plain and simple, yeah. Yeah, good car. Good little junior single seater. I think that's the last series that they really ran in, actually.
Okay. So how did you go about getting into that? Because obviously we all know, I mean, I'm not going to ask about finances and things like that, but money is a big thing, isn't it? Especially when you're starting out and making that transition from karts to cars. I mean, was there a group of people who were supporting you at the time? Was there a backer that came on board and said, this kid's got something and we want to be part of it? Or was it just a case of doing what you could?
I think it's really important in this conversation, and that's to say finances, that people are honest about it. And the honest answer is that it's almost impossible to get that kind of backing at that stage of your career, because at that point, as a semi-successful kart racer, I've got zero prospect of walking into a company and saying, please, would you give me 150 grand to go racing in a national series that is barely televised and nobody watches anyway, even when it is on. I say that because I have a lot of young racers that ask me how to get sponsorship, how to get to the next step, how to move forward. And I think too many people pump up these ideas of you just go around knocking on doors and asking for sponsorship or for backers, and the reality is very, very tough. And you're looking at a 1 in a million chance. Realistically, you need to have friends in the right places, contacts that can help you in those industries, or who are just wealthy and want to see you go and do those things. Or as I was very fortunate to be in that position, have a family that can. So I was very grateful to my family that they were willing to do that for me. And it's a lot of sacrifice, right? It's a lot of pressure, and you have to be very aware of what you're taking there as well. But yeah, I don't want to put any illusion out there that there was, because we had stickers on the car, but they're not sponsors, and it's extremely difficult to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, even more so in this current financial climate that we find ourselves in. Excuse me. But no, it's sort of great. Thank you for being so open and honest about it, because it makes the world go around, doesn't it? The almighty dollar, and
Sadly,
and it's great. And it's obviously great that you were able to get into the series. Did you find it a big step going from karts to a car like that, or did you find it almost not seamless? But did you take to it quite well, the cars?
I remember really clearly my first test, which was at Thruxton, the home of speed. Is that the tagline? I think.
Something like that, isn't it? Yeah.
The fastest circuit in the UK, and that was my first test. I'm not sure if you had that bright idea, but that's where I went. And I went out in a Clio RS that one of the team members had lying around. They were like, go and do some laps in that, you'll get an idea of the circuit. And I thought it was all pretty cruisy. It was quite easy, And the thing is, when you come from top level karting, those things are so agile, so nimble, so reactive, so hypersensitive to your inputs, because they weigh nothing. They've got a tiny wheelbase, no suspension, tons of grip. So you feel like you have to have a real mastery of those controls to get the best out of top level karting. So when you get into a car which is weighs closer to a ton rather than 100 kilos, you feel like everything's going to be pretty slow and easy by comparison. But the reality is it's a completely different set of requirements, driving techniques that you have to master, and that's mainly to do with managing weight and learning how that affects the tire, how you can overload it. The issue of, if you start going somewhere you don't want to go, it's actually quite hard to correct that and stop that, because you're carrying 10 times the weight, 10 times the energy with you. And at a place like Thruxton, as I found out, if you start to lose it, it's not like a go-kart where you just flick your wrist and you've caught it and you crack on. You need to catch things earlier. You need to be there quicker. Otherwise, you end up in the weeds, which I did, I think, about halfway through the first day. And it's quite scary when you first jump in, because you've got all of that energy and mass in a car that, like I say, is 10 times the weight of the kart that you're used to, and you're doing 150 miles an hour, and you're just thinking, this is so much potential for bad things to happen at that speed. But you get used to it very, very quickly. So the first day was a big learning curve, and then I think the first race was not long after that. We didn't have a massive grid. It was 10 cars, sometimes into single digits, but by the halfway point of the season, I was pretty comfortable and starting to test in the Formula Renault. That was kind of the next step up. Sorry. So yeah, it's pretty impressive how quickly your brain and your mind adapt to that speed.
Yeah, there's so many different things that people don't think about. Is the extra weight and the weight shift, and when it all goes wrong, things like that. I've got here that in that first season, you took 13 podiums from 23 races and took 2 wins.
It's not hard when there's only 6 cars racing, maybe.
It's still half the grid, isn't it? It's still half the field, so it's all right. So it's good. Just we'll take it. Absolutely.
No, it was a good little series. I don't mean to do it down. It was a great series and a great car for people like me that were getting into it. But it was a shame that it was so undersubscribed.
Yeah, sure. And you went on and did the Formula Renault Winter Series. Took another win in the 4 races there. I guess that was another little, just a little rung on the ladder. Was that another step up again in terms of like power and handling, things like that?
Yeah, it was with at the time the old Formula Renault. It's now 4 generations old, I think, but that was the last Formula Renault that had a sequential shifter rather than a flappy paddle one. And it's awesome fun, that car, because they're pretty light as well, relatively speaking. And we had 2 races one at Brands Hatch, and I can't remember where the other one was, but the Brands Hatch one was at the GP circuit, and it was soaking wet that weekend, and it's probably one of the most fun races I've had in a single seater because I love that circuit. I love that car. I love it in the wet. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was just a way of gaining experience before I went into the new Formula Renault car for the next season.
Okay, and you went into the full Euro Cup season as well. Excuse me. And I got straight off the bat, you took fifth at Hockenheim, which is obviously pretty cool circuit. Not as cool as old people like me remember the old one out into the forest, but that must have been a pretty cool place to start. It's got a big old grandstand there, and it's got so much history in the place. And to take fifth, I guess you enjoyed that first weekend.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it was my first experience of a European Grand Prix circuit, and they feel so wide and open compared to the national circuits that we've got. I think I did do a race at Silverstone at some point, but pretty much every other circuit on the national calendar, you're talking about places like Croft, Thruxton, Donington, Snetterton. It's all fairly tight, grass on the edge of the circuit, and then a barrier, and the grass is usually wet, so it's a speedy exit. Compared to Hockenheim, where unfortunately I live in that generation where most of the runoffs have been tarmacked already. So it's a very different feel because you can attack the circuit a ton more and take a lot of risk with the knowledge that you're not guaranteed to avoid an accident, but your chances are a lot higher than at the national level circuits, and it promotes a lot more racing as well because Formula Renault at Hockenheim, it's a pretty underpowered combination, and that makes for a lot of slipstreaming and drafting, and the field sizes back then for Formula Renault were 30 cars plus, so it was mega. It was great racing.
Yeah, great fun. And just quickly on runoffs, I don't want to get into the whole thing because it gets talked about so much. I'm of the old school. I like the grass and the barrier, but I'm not the guy in the car. I can talk about it all I want, but I guess you guys have different opinions on it. But it's a good point you make about it because maybe not without it, but with the reduced fear factor of if it does go wrong, I've got a bit of wriggle room here with a runoff area. You can be a bit more determined, and I think it's one of those things. People want to see the close racing and everything, but they also want to see people getting punished for going off, not in a big way, but just losing a bit of time on grass, something like that. I mean, we can't have both, surely, can we?
Well, I think like a lot of things, you probably can't have the best of both, but you can definitely get a balance and a compromise. And I think slowly we are starting to recognize that, and the organizing bodies are starting to recognize that. But it's constantly shifting and changing. Like, I race in IMSA now, which I'm sure we'll get onto, but a lot of the circuits there are known for being typically old school. They've got concrete walls with tires in front of them, not safer barriers. They've got grass or gravel or sand next to the track, not tarmac runoffs. And that's an appeal for a lot of people, including the drivers, because it's a different challenge. But a lot of the circuits there are starting to get more tarmac runoff as well. They're kind of going in that direction where we've seen European Grand Prix circuits starting to try and pull back on that and actually bring back some of the grass and the gravel because they've seen, that's what people want, and potentially it cuts down on the track limits abuse. So I'm just putting that out there to say it's clearly quite a tough one for the organisers and the track guys to try and figure out. In my ideal world, to put my opinion out there, I would definitely try and have less just tarmac runoff and more grass and gravel. I think that there are good ways of doing it. But I'm also not a motorbike rider because I know that they have a lot of issues with that, and the circuits that need both, it's tough. So yeah,
that's the issue. It's like curbs and runoff. How do you make it friendly for for two wheels and four wheels, things like that? Just while we're on the subject of bikes, and one of the circuits closely linked to bikes is Aston. Now I've been to Aston for MotoGP, and it's a brilliant place. You raced there in Formula Renault. What's it like racing around there in a car? Because it looks absolutely gloriously mental on a bike.
It's an interesting place. It's weird because you can tell it's not been designed not with cars in mind. Say, because I've driven it in Formula Renault, I think more than once, or definitely more than once. And then I went back for a couple of years with the Renault team to do the demonstration in the F1 car for the Gamma Racing Days. And on one of those occasions, they actually asked me to try and do a lap record, which we did take, the unofficial lap record. And I had thought, my experience in Formula Renault was that it was so wide and open and flowing that it wasn't necessarily challenging enough for the single seater, in the sense that it just lacked a bit of, I don't know, it felt like you needed to have more legs in the car or less grip, one of the two, to make it a really interesting track, which obviously the bikes have. Everything's more challenging for them. But even doing it in the F1 car, it was kind of a weird one that I was like, it just feels like the corners don't have that. I don't know if it's the radius of them or because they're quite long corners, which bikes prefer. But it wasn't a satisfying place in a car, which was interesting. I liked racing there, but it just doesn't have the same appeal as a Silverstone, a Spa, a Monza, those other high-speed tracks that inherently are quite satisfying to get right.
Yeah, it goes to show that the way a circuit is designed, and what it's designed for, can have a huge impact on a lot of things. So say hello. We got Mr. Michael Crease. Creasy's in British, current British touring car driver, as far as we know. He said he's one of the he's one of the Buckmore Park alumni. So and he says us Buckmore Park boys haven't done too bad. Absolutely right, and hope to see you on the grid this year, Creasy. Thank you for tuning in. So yes, you're in. Just to go back to your progress. I mean, you've obviously gone through the Formula Renault and things like that. 2014, you're back in the Euro Cup, but slightly slow start in 2014. But a third at the Nürburgring, cool podium to be on.
Yep.
Obviously not on the Nordschleife, obviously, but still pretty cool to to go again to such a historical circuit. And was that the first time there? That one.
I'd done a test there, but it was first time racing there. So yeah, it was a cool experience. That year was an interesting one because it was my last year that I was still in school as well, in 2014. So I had all my A levels, and that was pretty painful trying to juggle the two of them at the same time, because by this stage, Formula Renault Euro Cup is a series that you can't mess around with, or it was at the time, and it still is to today, in its slightly new form, which meant that really you need to go testing, and you need to do quite a bit of testing, and you can't half-arse it. And that's what I did while I was at school, because we didn't really have much other option, to the extent that I was taking my my school textbooks with me and my notes with me to the track, because I'd have the race week and then get back on the Monday or Tuesday, and I actually had like exams to sit, which was not ideal, and it didn't happen often. But that was pretty terrible, just being fully honest. It was not a good time, and I wouldn't recommend anybody. I mean, I recommend people stay in school, but it's hard.
Yeah, juggling some very important things at a young age as well, and traveling and everything else. One thing also, that year you did get your first win in this series at the Hungaroring, one of the few untouched circuits in my book. That must have felt great, getting that first win under your belt. I mean, even with all the school stuff going on, it must have been a nice distraction.
It was amazing. It felt like a bit of a breakthrough, especially because back then, I don't know if it's the same now, the format was Saturday, Sunday were copies. So Saturday you had a quali and a race, much like DTM, and Sunday you had a quali and a race, and they were completely separate events, if you like. The Saturday was probably one of my worst Saturdays of the whole campaign, because I lost it is it turn 10, the fast left that's normally flat at the end of sector 2 before you take the fast right onto the back straight. I lost it there crossing a river, hit the barrier, damaged the car fairly badly, started from the back of the race, of the grid, and because it's Hungaroring and it's very tough to overtake, didn't make much progress and was a very sad chat afterwards. And then on Sunday, I poled it and won the race. So it was like that was a big contrast, but I needed that that swing, that confidence boost, if you like. So yeah.
And I guess nice to get it after such a disappointing day the day before. You probably down in the dumps, and then it completely turned around again, and you're off and flying, which is great. So that you had some more podiums out in Spain and excuse me, things like that. One thing I want to touch on quickly: you went out to the States, the Pro Mazda, which are then it's evolved into something else, hasn't it? But the Pro Mazda Winter Series and a few races there. Were you thinking of maybe going over to America, IndyCar, Indy Lights? Was that a possibility at the time?
It was more a function of where can we get in a good winter championship to keep me sharp over the winter, because I think for a lot of drivers that's a question they ask themselves every year. Now for me with GT and sports car racing, that's less of a problem because the season kind of extends. But when you're a single-seater driver coming up and track time is everything, and your season ends in October and then it starts again in March or April, that's a lot of time to be out of the car and more specifically out of racing. So it's quite a common question that we ask ourselves every year: what winter championships are out there that we can do? And Pro Mazda was one that came up. It was something different. It was something that we weren't necessarily considering Indy Lights, IndyCar, but we knew that by racing there, my name would get out a bit in the States, and if I did a good job, that's no bad thing either. To have those options. So
Shot window,
it all works well. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, oh, cool. And so you went out there. I think you won the Winterfest, which is it's a good way to put your name, out there by winning. I did notice that you beat Dalton Kellett in that, and I've had Dalton on here. He's a good lad. He is the most intelligent man I've ever spoken to, isn't he? He just walked away from racing because he wants to go and do sciencey stuff.
That's how I would describe it too. Yeah, sciencey stuff. I don't know what he does specifically. I know he's very smart and very articulate.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he was talking about something about an Indy car, and it was about suspension loadings and stuff. He did a whole thing on Twitter about it, and I understood about 6 words in about 30 tweets because it was just, incredible stuff. And he didn't really get a full crack in IndyCar, I don't think, but he walked away because he wanted.
He was too nice, even back then, and probably now. We keep in touch a little bit because we also drove for the same team. But back then, certainly, he was such a nice guy. It almost hurt you to see him on track and have to overtake him or whatever. I don't think he had. Yeah, he needed to sharpen the elbows a little bit.
Yeah, he's a nice chap. Too nice a chap for to be too mean to to muscle his way past someone. But yeah, lovely guy. But yeah, you came back, switched to Koiranen GP.
Good pronunciation, well done. Most people completely
Koiranen?
fumble that. Koiranen, yeah, not Koiranen.
Koiranen. It sounds Finnish, and I know a few Finnish people. But that's what I'm basing it on.
Estonians in that team.
Okay, well, that's just over the water, not too far.
Exactly.
Near enough, close enough. What was the thinking behind that? Was it just going for a championship, and they seemed like the place to achieve it?
I mean, junior single-seater series, you can learn a lot from history, I think, recent history. So that means, you can try and break the trend and go with a team that is less proven, probably cheaper. And that's certainly what a lot of people will try or are forced to do. We were pretty clear we'd had a good run motorsport, British team, but for a long time in the Euro Cup. and Corrigan had won it twice, I think, in the last 2 years. Nick De Vries was the winner before I joined them. So at the last race, we set up the meeting and we said, look, we want to win the championship, and you seem like the guys to do it with. And the atmosphere in the team when I went for the first test was, there's no disrespect to Quartec, like I said, it's a great team, but it was completely different. It was partly because I think that's a British culture thing versus the Scandi culture, but it was dead silent in the garage, and everyone was just quietly getting on with their work. And you walk in and you kind of think, this is a bit sad and dreary. And there's no music, there's no banter, there's no laughing. But actually, that's probably just, I caught them in a bad moment, because they were really, really great guys, but they just got on with stuff quietly in their own way. And they had that aura of confidence that comes with a team that's recently had that success. And you see it in other teams like Prema or ART when they were in their prime. You walk into a garage and people have got that bit of pep in their walk, that confidence in their voice that, we did it last year, so, why should it be any different? We're just going to keep doing our jobs the way we need to do them. And that makes a big difference. It rubs off on younger drivers as well, quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, sure. And it's nice to walk into like a winning atmosphere, even if it seems dreary to begin with. But obviously, there's that confidence that you talk about, and that must give you a shot in the arm. I mean, it was a fairly you had some retirements at Aragon and Spa and things like that, but once again, Hungary, it kind of clicked. Circuit you seem to do well at, but fast forward, you had a double pole at Silverstone and then a win in the first race on the Silverstone weekend. It's the home of British motorsport. That must have felt pretty cool. Winning at home.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my first time winning at Silverstone, didn't quite have the crowds of the last time that I won there, but it still was a pretty massive moment, because British driver at Silverstone, you don't need to explain it. I had my family watching the whole weekend. I had quite a lot of friends and family there, actually, because it was the first time an international series that I was in a winning position for. We had come to Silverstone, so we invited a lot of people over. And I think on the last lap, because it was the old start-finish line that Formula Renault was using, I think coming out from Luffield, I had my arm out the cockpit for about 500 meters, just getting the celebration in early, because I was like, I'm going to milk this. Don't know when it's going to happen next. Hopefully soon, but that was a big one.
That's cool. It's nice to have the gap to be able to to do that, and just to really enjoy the moment. That must be very cool.
Yeah. You want to have those moments.
Yeah. Yes, but winning at home, as you say, doesn't happen often, and and to do it at Silverstone, even better. And it was a pretty special year all the way through, wasn't it? I mean, again, you won at the Nürburgring, another cool place to to take a victory, and winning at Silverstone and Nürburgring. If you're going to win at two places, it's pretty good. And then two more wins in Spain to clinch the championship. I mean, to have gone through, gone from karts and into cars and had a success in the Pro Mazda, and then to win a championship on an international level, that must have been really, really, really special.
Yep. Yeah, it was my first year out of school. So I think that made a massive difference, being able to do the testing and even just have the clear headspace for it, rather than worrying about schoolwork, and doing a good job in that, or a good enough job in that. You got so much more free time when you're full time on the racing, and for me that meant a lot more time daydreaming about driving, racing, what could be done. You're full of energy at that time, so you can dedicate a lot into it mentally. Um, I think I wasn't leading it, And going into the last weekend, I knew that if I polled it and won both, or if I won both races, I was going to win no matter what because of the way the points would work out. And I knew with it being Jerez, which is another place that's very difficult to overtake in, if I polled it for both races, I would probably win because my starts were pretty good. It was quite a gap between the penultimate round and the last round, and it just became a 2 month gap thinking about my quali lap at Jerez, which crystallized in actually being able to do it, and that was a huge amount of satisfaction, almost more than winning the championship, which is a bit more. I don't want to say it felt a distant achievement. It was just that I'd spent so long thinking about that qualifying lap, knowing that's what I had to do to win the title, and to put in all that work and then execute it and actually get it done was huge and a massive moment for me. So yeah, it meant a lot. And with the championship win, that brought a lot of other things in my career and brought a lot more attention, brought a lot more opportunities, and those things made a huge difference in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point you make at the end in terms of getting noticed and being heard of. I mean, I'll hold my hand up. That was when I first heard of you, was when you won that championship. Excuse me. And I guess the next natural step was GP3 or similar. And I guess being champion, I wouldn't say made it easier, but obviously you were in the shop window and people knew who you were. Did you have many options for teams or series, or was GP3 always going to be the way to go?
We had a few options, luckily or thankfully. I was the first champion for a long time, I think, from Eurocup to not then graduate to the 3.5 series, which were great cars. But that was when Renault had announced that they were pulling out of the World Series. So it was kind of the start of the end of that championship. It did carry on in some form for a couple of years or even a few years, but we had kind of saw the writing on the wall for that. And we asked Renault instead if they would support us going into GP3 because there's a cash prize when you win the Euro Cup. So luckily they agreed to that, and I did a few tests with different teams, one of which was Arden, another British team, and they'd had sort of mixed results in GP3, but some recently had some success and done quite well. We went with them, and GP3 was kind of a different level in terms of how little track time you got as a junior driver. So you're still developing, really. You're still a young person, learning a lot, and to go from pretty much unlimited testing in Formula Renault and tires that you could do half a day on one set of tires and keep getting useful laps in, to GP3 where there's pretty much no testing allowed. You go to a weekend and you're the lowest priority there because you're on a Grand Prix weekend, which means you get the rubbish time slots. You only get 45 minutes of practice before you head into quali, and the tyres can only do 5 laps before they're ruined, because it was in that era of really high degradation tyres from Pirelli. I know people still think they're high deg, but they were really high deg back then. So I struggled a lot in the beginning. The start of the season was really tough. It was a big adjustment, a very different driving style, a lot more power and a lot less relative grip compared to the Formula Renault. And Arden were fantastic in guiding me through that, teaching me and being patient. And a lot of the engineers there they kept telling me the same key things of, you need to drive the corners this way. You can't carry speed like you did in the Renault. You have to, stop it on a dime, point and go. And I was just like, I don't get it. I'm doing that. I'm doing it, and it's still rubbish. And then at Hockenheim, I'm sure it's in your notes, I had kind of a breakthrough weekend of my first podium, I think. Or was it a first one? I can't remember. First podium, and I walked straight into the 10 afterwards, and I said, okay, I understand. And it just clicks like that sometimes, and it takes you doing it to figure it out. but it was very rewarding, and that was a very challenging 6 months for me as well.
Yeah. I do love hearing about those differences just between cars that appear, from the outside looking in, appear to be quite similar, but are obviously completely different to drive. And obviously, it felt great when it clicked. Hockenheim, I've got that. I've got it as a podium, and you had a good run of very strong results. Excuse me, from the end of that year. Was it 6 podiums in the last 7 races I've got there, which was obviously a very strong end. But you took a win at Spa. Now, I mean, you've won at some cool places by this point, but now that you've got used to the car, the extra speed of it, and how it handles, and how to get the best out of it, winning at Spa must have been that must have felt really, really good, because obviously we all know what Spa is like as a circuit and the challenges of it. Winning there must have been a huge highlight.
Yep, it was pretty magical, partly because it was the Sunday race as well. So it was reverse grid. I think I started 3rd-ish. You're reminding me of a lot of statistics about my own career, which is a bit weird, but I'm enjoying it.
No, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. I remember decent start, and then thinking, right, I've only got 2 guys to pass, and I know I'm quicker than both of them. Just set off and did it, and was picking them off one by one, making sure I didn't cook the tyres, which was always the concern back then in GP3. And the last laps, I had enough of a gap that you could just enjoy it. And I was looking, and the bank on the Kemmel Straight was full of fans, because they were all there early to get their seats for the F1. I was not under any false illusions that they were there just to see us. But it was cool because they were supporting it. They were there anyway, as it was. So that was my first win in front of such a crowd, and it makes a massive difference, because that's why we're here. Not to pull out that cliche, but really, it makes a big difference. You have to recognise that, yeah, we're all on a journey. We're trying to get to our peak, sporting wise, but at the end of the day, we're only here because we're doing it as entertainment, and we're doing it for the pleasure of others. And that's got a special rewarding feeling to it when you put on a show and you can claim to be the guy at the center of the story, aka winning it, and you can just enjoy that for a little bit and be selfish on the podium, and you see a full grandstand on an F1 weekend. That's pretty cool. So it was a really nice moment, not least because it was Spa, and an iconic track by itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nice to hear a driver say that, saying that it is good, to race in front of people and put on a show and be the center of things, and have, as you say, that kind of selfish moment, because you put a lot of work in, and no driver should be begrudged feeling that way. Because, you guys put on the show for us. As you say, we all go to trackside to be entertained, to enjoy a race. So, yeah, everyone should enjoy it, especially the driver. Absolutely. And also, and as you say, an absolutely iconic place to take a victory. Championship that year went to a fella called Charles Leclerc. He's quite good. He went on to
Who?
Charles something. Is it Leclerc? I don't know. From Monaco or France or somewhere like
he's
that.
He's all right.
Yeah, he's okay. But yeah, I mean, obviously quite cool to share the track with drivers, of that ability. Obviously, everyone's very good at that level. So, yeah. And
but I think it was I don't want to say that my generation was the good one. I think every driver thinks that. But looking back at those years of GP3, and then the following year that I did F2, or GP3 again and then F2, it was stacked with drivers that I think are massively talented, and also bring an attitude and a way of going about things that I've got a lot of respect for. So I think it was a really, really solid grid at that time, and I was happy to be shoulder to shoulder with them, as it were.
Yeah, fantastic. And that year you were selected for the for Renault's young driver program in F1. That must have been exciting. Just having that that increased possibility of getting into an F1 car must have been a huge tick in the box for you.
Yep. No, it was a very, very cool moment. I mean, it was a bit of a surreal winter because we Renault had been in contact because of the Euro Cup championship win, and they wanted to start supporting people that were winning the championship, which they still do to this day, I think. So that kind of started that tradition. We were also in contact with another junior program with an F1 team. So we had a choice to make, as it were. And it was, like I said, a surreal moment because as a driver, these were both teams that I looked up to, and certainly this other program had a lot of cachet, and it was a bit of a moment of, I could think about this logically and look at what they're offering in the contract and the length of term and what my development possibilities with them would be. Or I could just look at it like it would be really cool to call myself a Renault driver, or it would be really cool to call myself a X driver. And both of those things were true. They're things that as a young driver doing karting, that's the stuff you dream of. To be able to wear those suits, to have that livery on your car. Yeah. It's really, really special. But you do have to separate, the fan that we all are. I don't think there's any driver that's not really to some level a fan of racing or cars, and the guy that's thinking about his career. And those choices led me to Renault, and it was a fantastic program to be a part of, and I was massively excited to join it and start that journey with them.
Yeah. I often wonder the first night after you sign the contract, you sort of lie in bed thinking, bloody hell, I've just signed a contract with Renault and F1. I mean I don't think I'd sleep for 3 days, but that's just me being overexcited probably. But it's just
I was excited. I mean, I was very happy. It was a very, it was honestly quite a validating moment because I think like a lot of sports people, you can struggle with having your self-worth tied up in your results. It goes both ways, right? When you're having a bad year, it's pretty disheartening and it can be destroying if you don't have a really good support system around you. But equally, when it goes well and these big wins come your way, and a team like Renault is saying, we want you as a potential driver for us in the future, and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is, on that assumption, that's massive for a young driver. So I was very pleased with myself for a while after signing that contract, and it wasn't helped by Renault inviting me out to the launch of the car in the early part of the next season, and getting to do the tour of the factory and all of this stuff, and having my eyes open to the whole world of F1.
Fantastic, that's cool. And again, I'm glad to hear you gave yourself a pat on the back because you guys do work incredibly hard. All racers do, and to get that reward, especially F1, Renault, full contract, doesn't get too much better. So terrific. Just before we get to the F1 machinery, 2017 you were with ART Grand Prix. Obviously, we know they're one of the top outfits. Excuse me, in the feeder series world. I guess it was a bit of a no-brainer. They were reigning champions, and when the opportunity came up, it was pretty easy, I guess.
It was to an extent, because they had the track record. They were pretty dominant at that time, but as you mentioned before, we'd had such a good run in the second half of the season with Arden that was quite that made it very difficult. 6 podiums out of 7 races at the end of the year. I think me and my teammate Jake Dennis were the 2 top point scorers, beating all of the ART drivers. Jake beat me by 1 point, which I didn't hold against him. So I had an engineer that I got on with very well. I really liked the team. The management was good. The mechanics were solid. But it was that nagging thing of, ART still beat them, and they have been beating them for a few years. So we went with ART, and me and my dad, who was basically my manager through this time, we still talk about that decision and wonder, maybe that wasn't the right decision, but it would have been an incredibly ballsy call to not go with what was then the dominant team.
Sure. Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously, as you said, they'd been so strong for so long, and I guess there was that pull, and you were alongside George Russell and Antoine Gilbert. We'll come to Antoine shortly. You just had the one win all year, unsurprisingly, in Hungary, place you seem to go very well at, which is great. But excuse me. It was just George was just quick that year, wasn't he? He just seemed to. I mean, obviously, I was following the Brits, and I obviously wanted you guys to do well, of course. And it was nice having you and George running at the front. But he was just strong, wasn't he? He just didn't seem to put a foot wrong really all year.
Yeah, no, he was, and George was very consistent. And at the end of the day, my best days weren't as good as his best days, so I didn't get the win often enough, and I didn't have enough. I was consistent as well, but we were all consistent at ART because we had such a good package that was kind of the bare minimum, if you like. If we weren't making huge mistakes, we were going to finish well. I say this as if the car is miles better than everyone else. It wasn't. It's just that as a whole package, as a team, we were very well drilled. We were all drivers that had a good amount of experience in mid-level single-seaters. The engineers had been there many times before, and the strategy side was all very good. The mechanics were good. We didn't make a lot of mistakes, so consistency was good. But George just had the edge in speed all year, and I kicked myself up and down the halls that year trying to find those extra tenths or extra hundredths sometimes, and I just couldn't quite do it. I couldn't quite get on as well as I wanted with the setup of the car, because every team has a slightly different philosophy, and where I'd really gelled with Arden and felt quite natural and at ease, the ART car probably I just didn't get on with quite as well, not to a disastrous level, but to the point where after the first couple of races, you start thinking about it and you're thinking, maybe I need to change some stuff about my driving style. Maybe I need to do this. Or George is doing that in the data. Maybe I'll try that. Antoine's done that and he was quicker at that corner. We were so closely matched that everyone had their strengths. And when you start analysing that deeply, you can just start overthinking it, basically. And I think I wasn't experienced enough to really pull myself out of that situation. And I actually made it worse as the year went on. So, but that taught me a lot as well. It was a very tough year. I finished second in the championship. It really didn't feel like I should have finished second, based on how I felt. But it taught me a massive amount about dealing with those situations and just struggling with a car and having to get around that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you say about overthinking. I had Callum Ilott on here 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he said the same thing. He was trying to, look at what other people were doing and could I do something differently? And it takes you out of who you are, and you're trying to. And when you get a package that you can just relax with, it does make a huge difference. And I guess you can. I guess you can relate to that to a degree. But as you say, you still took second overall, which not to be sniffed at by any stretch. And the following year, you moved it up to F2 with George with ART GP. That again, an exciting step. The one below F1, and just like a new car, a more powerful car, I guess. Must have been an exciting time in pre-season and like going into the first race.
It was, yeah. Like you say, because it was a new car that year, so it felt like a bit of a reset button, which always favours the rookies. Saw it as a bit of an opportunity. Still had some lingering doubts from the previous season. it's a new car, challenges that goes with that. And I've always prided myself that when I move up a category, up to that point in my career, I'd always been better. You know, with a bigger car, a faster car, I usually felt more comfortable. So I kind of carried that into the season, and the start of testing went really well. Was really, really strong in the postseason test in Abu Dhabi, and then in the preseason testing as well. Felt like I was really on top of things, and I hope, you know, I'm trying to be as transparent as I can be always, and I hope that's still okay. But the preseason testing, I was faster than George, beating him pretty regularly on the quali runs that we had. But unfortunately for me, it didn't quite translate into the race weekends, and I again started to struggle in the same way, probably overthinking it. Not helped because as you mentioned, we were so close to F1 at that point, and I had a lot of pressure from Renault. We'd been together for 3 years at that point and had quite a good relationship. But you know, there's a time when the pressure ramps up. You know, they're looking for a return on their investment. Test sessions with the F1 team were on the cards, on the table, if you did a good enough job, not to mention a race seat. So all of that probably stoked the overthinking a little bit more again, and I still wasn't able to deal with it the way that I wanted to. So I struggled a little bit again.
I mean, again, that's something that fans looking in, perhaps, and why would they, don't understand the pressure. You think, oh, well, you know, you're an F2, you're nearly at F1, go and race, go and do your thing, it's not that easy. I mean, not that I know, but it surely cannot be that easy. Okay, so, well, you know, you're in F2, you must know you're good. You're in a good team and you're doing this and that. That's a very basic way to look at it. And as you say, there's a huge mental pressure, you know, because there's, as you mentioned, the team with whom you have signed are expecting that return on the investment. And I think there's a lot of people underestimate how much that can affect a driver, because, as you say, all of a sudden you're not focusing on the driving, which is the bit all the fans see. You know,
I don't know. I think it's a tough one, because I never felt like I was someone that was really susceptible to outside pressures, i.e. someone telling me before I got in the car, Jack, you really need to win this race. It's really important. I've generally felt pretty good at disregarding that and just saying, well, that helps me exactly 0 points, and I'm just going to go and do my job. Where I was falling down, and this is from the benefit of hindsight, right? As an older, more mature person and a driver with a lot more experience now, and hopefully that will be, again, in a decade or so, another more experienced Jack Aitken. But looking back now, it's pretty clear that actually I was just putting too much pressure on myself, and I knew that I had problems that I wasn't solving, whether it was to do with driving style or consistency in certain areas of my driving. And because the results were not as good as I wanted them to be, that was kind of all mounting up, and me trying more things, trying things in a different way, putting more effort into different things. And often more effort is a very delicate thing. You know, if you try harder to balance a tightrope, you're probably going to fall off. And a lot of driving is such fine motor movements, such fine feelings, that trying harder can really undo you. And that's the situation that I was in. And it was kind of, I guess the external pressures on top were just a bit of a frustration for me, because I felt like I could ignore them, but you also can't ignore the reality of, I'm not performing, I'm coming towards that crunch time in my career. And, you know, that is a problem that I'm failing to solve right now. And it was really as simple as that.
I can only imagine the frustrations, you know, knowing not what the issue is, I don't, for the want of a better word, but where the little tweaks needed to happen, and just not quite being able to iron them all out must have been incredibly frustrating at that time. But still, I mean, there were signs in the season that showed, that you could get on top of it and you could beat these guys and put it all together. One being like Barcelona, the first win in F2, and you beat Alex Albon, Lando Norris, and George Russell. And what is the feeling at that time? Because you've won the race, it's great, you've beaten these guys. Is there still that nagging thing in the back of your head thinking, I can do this every week. I can do it here. Can I do it every week?
There was a bit of that. I mean, it was early in the season, so I wasn't so. Things got worse as the season unfolded. So at that stage, it wasn't too bad. Yeah, and I just felt like this is how it should be. This is. It's not arrogance. It's just the confidence that this is where I should be. This is what happens when I do the job the way I'm meant to do it.
Yeah.
And I expect myself to be here in a way. Equally, that race was not a typical race for us because it was the track was a drying track. It started out not wet but damp, and I've always done well in those conditions, and that no doubt helped me. So, we got to the next round, and I was struggling a bit again, and it was more frustration really. But I had a few good races.
Yeah.
It wasn't all bad. It was just I wasn't able to replicate it often enough.
Yeah, sure. One thing I did see was you took second at Baku. Now people are down on street circuits in Baku and stuff. I think Baku's brilliant. I'm a big fan of street circuits. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I think they're great. And is everything just magnified that little bit more when you're going on a street circuit? We talked about runoffs and barriers and things earlier. Not a lot of that street circuits. Does it just heighten everything just that little bit?
It does. I mean, it does come down to bravery a lot of the time, because street circuits, especially ones like Baku, which certainly when I was driving, it was always very dirty there and very dusty. So even at the end of the weekend on a Sunday, you had a good chance of locking a wheel or getting a snap when you really don't want it, and it was just low grip and high risk in a lot of areas. I for whatever reason clicked with it. I always enjoyed going to Baku. It's a lot of big braking zones, and how late can you go and get the thing stopped and into the apex, and how close can you shave the walls?
I think
because there's no curbs.
From turn one looking in, that looks nuts after the long drag. That must be quite a twitchy front.
In the F2 cars, with DRS, you're doing 330 kilometers an hour, 210 miles an hour.
Sheesh.
You're going seriously quick. It's bumpy. So it was a cool track. I really liked it. And that year I went well there because it was a very different driving style to a lot of the classic Grand Prix circuits.
Yeah, absolutely. Got Jim McKendrick in the comments. He said Baku's a fabulous track, fabulous race for a street track. Yes, absolutely, fully agree. It's one of my favourites. I do love it. Yeah. We're going to come to F1 machinery in a minute. But obviously, 2019, you switched to Campos Racing. Was it just a new challenge needed? Something a bit different environment?
It was a combination of two things. It was different environment. I think after 2 years with ART, we felt, and when I say we, I mean really me and my family, who were my management, if you like. But I also had some people helping me on the performance side. We all felt like that was not an environment where I was doing well. It was an environment where both team and driver had lost some confidence in each other, which is pretty fatal. And there was a little bit of a breakdown in trust, which is quite common in those situations, sadly, and not a reflection on team or driver. It's just, a high pressure cooker and the results aren't there, and it gets difficult. So it was then looking to what other teams would be suitable, but we were also starting to run out of budget. That Renault had supported me quite a lot. disappointing 2 years really, because even though I finished in GP3, like I said, it wasn't a year that was up to guys. They pulled back some of the budget that they were offering, and as everyone I think knows, Formula 2 is extremely expensive. You're talking millions, not hundreds of thousands even. And I didn't have sponsors, significant ones anyway, outside of Renault. So we had to find a cheaper team.
Right.
Because the logical step from ART to another good team would be a Prema, a Dams. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, so I'm sorry to those teams. But that caliber of team, it just wasn't an option for us. So then you're looking at the mid tier of the pack, where you can cut a deal and get a lot of money off from those top tier teams. We had a meeting with Campos. They had a team that I knew some of them from previous teams, previous working relationships, who I believed in, and that swung it quite a lot for me. And they kind of rewarded my it was a bit of a gut feeling more than anything. And we to be honest, we didn't have a lot of choice at that time, but it turned out to be a really good decision in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, that's sort of borne out in the results. I mean, you've got like 7th in Bahrain, a win, and 3rd in Baku, 2nd in Spain, 3rd in France. I mean, it was a really strong start to the year. And obviously, you must have been happy with how it was going. And then Silverstone happened, which, fastest lap and a sprint race victory on Grand Prix weekend. In front of hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, I'm smiling and I wasn't even there. I mean, it must have been incredible to have done that.
It was. Probably one of the most special races, special days of my career to date, and will be regardless of where my career goes, because it was that special concoction of things that a race driver loves, which is to say, I won it not the easy way. I had to catch and overtake a few different guys, and the final overtake, or actually all of the overtakes were not bad, but the final overtake on Louis Delatraz, who I'm still good friends with, so sorry, Louis. But it was a pretty good move into Brooklands, right in front of the BRDC clubhouse, right in front of a packed Luffield stand, which is where I had first watched my first Grand Prix as a kid. My family there, my friends were there, and it was on Grand Prix Sunday, like you say, so the stands were absolutely packed. And it's absolutely one of the most special memories that I've got. I don't really know what to say. I was quite emotional about it at the time, even I think I gave an interview on the podium where I said, I know fans are obviously just here to save their seats for the F1, but it's still pretty special for me to win in front of a home crowd like that. And the amount of messages that I got after the race saying, we weren't just saving our seats, we were there to watch you guys, you're the best racing. And people saying that they were there to watch the British drivers in F2 and they loved it, and they had videos of us on track. And that was really special as well, because of all the things that I said before about, that's what you're there for at the end of the day. And it was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim McKendrick said that you won in front of the home crowd and made us all proud. Don't do yourself down. Absolutely, yeah.
You silly sausage.
Silly sausage, yeah. I'll let you do the silly sausage bit. That's fine. But very quickly, I mean, it doesn't really come across really on the TV. British fans at the British Grand Prix. I was there in 2021 for the whole weekend. It's loud. I've been to a lot of football matches. I've been to a lot of things, but goodness me, the racket that can be generated on the Hamilton Straight there is something else. And Yeah, and like you hearing the national anthem and the cheer and everything else like that. What a moment! Love it. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I got that through all of the home video that had been captured and then sent to me afterwards.
Yeah.
Just the sheer noise, either when I was making that final overtake, when I crossed the line, when I was on the podium. It was, yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like you say, it's a special atmosphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, unfortunately, we have to go to the opposite extreme just very quickly. I mean, Spa that year. We all know what happened with Antoine Hubert and Juan Manuel Correa. Again, I spoke with Callum about this because he was obviously racing in the same series. He was there. Obviously, we don't want to dwell on it too long because it's an awful situation. But I mean, he said that afterwards he watched it quite a lot of times just to go through in his head what could have happened differently, what went wrong, what could have, all manner of analysis. Firstly, where were you when the incident happened? And it feels daft to say, but how did you feel? How did you address it after the news broke that we'd lost him?
Yeah. So I mean, I was it's an insight into driver mentality maybe, but I was doing quite well. I think I had a great start, jumped up to third place from a lower grid spot, and we did the first racing lap, crossed the line, and were cracking on. And I was feeling really good and was carrying a lot of momentum from Silverstone. This was another opportunity to get a lot of points. I was still in the championship fight somewhat. So they red flagged it halfway through the second lap. I didn't know what had happened because it had happened behind me.
Right.
They obviously weren't showing any footage. They weren't sharing any information with the teams. So we rolled into pit lane, stopped in pit lane. The usual procedure, you stay in the car and get ready for a restart. And I remember asking the team, what's the latest information? What's going on? We're going to get going. And they just kept saying, sorry, no information. We're still waiting. We just know it's a crash at Eau Rouge. And I don't think those words carried the same weight as they do either now or maybe further in the past when cars were less safe.
Yeah.
In 2019, at that moment, when your engineer says, sorry, don't know anymore, no information, it's a crash at Eau Rouge, there wasn't enough recent history of that kind of accident to send a chill down your spine.
Sure.
So I didn't think anything of it. And then I think a few minutes later, it didn't take them long to call it and say, that's it, the race is over, head back to the paddock, it's not going to restart. Still no more information.
Right.
And I started swearing blue murder on the radio. I was like, well, I'm not going to repeat what I said, but it was along the lines of course they're going to cancel it when we have the best start of the season and we're onto a flyer.
Yeah. Calling the
Sod's
law.
That's Sod's law. Yeah. And I was really, really angry, frustrated. Not angry at anyone, just frustrated
at the situation. Yeah.
So he rolled into the support pit lane, which is of course just after the first corner, and you get a little sight, and you're curious. So I looked to see what was happening at the first corner. You can't really see anything. There's some support vehicles there. I can't see anything more from where I am. So park it up in front of the garage. You walk down to the race scales because you have to take your weight even under a red flag. And all the drivers are going down there. And obviously, a lot of the other drivers that were further back, they saw the accident or were a part of it. So then information starts to come through about how bad it was. And a couple of guys involved, they don't know what's happened. It happened so quickly that it was like, well, something happened, someone crashed or people crashed, but I don't know why, I don't know how it was or what the situation is. And a few other people saying, it wasn't that bad. just barrier, and then a couple of others saying, no, I think it was quite bad. I saw a really big hit. So you got all of that information going around, and that was probably the first time that you're a little bit nervous, because it's quite rare for a driver to say, no, that was quite bad, even if it was only one or two voices. And we left still waiting for more information from the track and the officials. But then rumours are starting to come through, because some people have information that they shouldn't, or whatever. And word starts to get out, and it's Antoine, and it's potentially quite bad. Nobody really knows what the situation is, but he needs, we didn't know what the health condition was. There's a lot more waiting, more information's trickling through. And then you start seeing the fan footage on Twitter or on Facebook. You can see it's a really big hit. But even then, these cars are so overbuilt that generally they should be able to take that kind of a hit. But you're starting to get quite worried. A lot of people are really concerned now, because it had been so long, we hadn't heard anything. It's pretty clear that there was some level of injury, some level of some problem. And then I can't remember how long after, but Renault being involved with Antoine at that time as well, we were privy to slightly more information than others. I was making quite regular trips to the Renault motorhome to try and get more information, because I knew that they would have the updates. And we started to get the rumours then that it was fatal.
Wow.
Which no one really, you don't really anticipate that. It's not a scenario that anyone at that stage, as a young driver, as a driver in the modern era, it's not something that you ever consider or are really prepared for. Everyone in an official position, though, is still saying no information. We don't know anything more, because, of course, you can't confirm or speculate about these things until it's certain.
Sure.
And then I think I knew maybe 5 minutes before it became public knowledge, but they called the Renault Academy drivers, and they told us, they broke news to us in the motorhome. And then news starts to get out quite fast, because, of course, you let other people know. And then, it was really, really heavy, the atmosphere. And I don't think anyone, even of the older generations who had been in racing for a long time, whether they were engineers or coaches or whatever, they hadn't had to deal with that for a very long time. And they hadn't had to deal with it with a driver that they were taking care of probably ever. So it hit engineers, mechanics, management as hard as it hit a lot of the drivers. So it was, it was terrible.
I can only imagine how that must have felt on the weekend. The atmosphere change. For you guys who were inside the ropes, I can't even imagine, because the first we as fans heard of it were, I think there was an interview with Lewis Hamilton, and he saw it and he went, "Oh God, that's a bad one." And then obviously it filtered through after you guys obviously found out. And I mean, from memory, I think because it was 2019, was it 25 years? I think it was Ayrton Senna was the last one that we lost on a Grand Prix weekend, I think. Do correct me if I'm wrong. And as you say, even the most experienced folk, that's a long time for them to have to deal with it as well. And wow.
I mean, it's a part of it's a part of life. I don't even want to say it's a part of racing, because I think it was a very eye-opening experience for a lot of us. Like I said, we'd never had to deal with that before, and now it was front and center.
Yeah.
really question what they were doing, which is not a bad thing. Everyone that asked to continue, which I think is a positive and says a lot about why we do it and why, how strongly people feel about it. But it was completely tragic, and to Antoine, I'm not gonna talk about him in a sporting sense because he was a fantastic driver. Who knows what would have happened to him as a driver, but as a person, it's completely tragic that he was lost at such a young age. And a guy that was, genuinely funny, charming, witty, especially for a Frenchman, and just a brilliant human being all around, fiercely competitive and really, really driven. He was a guy that I had a huge amount of respect for. And I say all of those things without a shred of embellishment because of his death, the situation. I think that's really important. You remember people for what they were, and you don't need to glorify them in death. I think a lot of people like to talk about Antoine in a sporting sense, potentially glorify his sporting exploits. I think it's completely unnecessary. You just needed to know the guy as a human, and that's more than enough. We don't need to speculate on where he would have been and what he would have done. And yeah, as people in the chat are saying, the same goes for a lot of others that have been lost.
And I, full credit to you for taking that tack and focusing on the person rather than the sportsman and the racer. And there's so many people say, oh, so and so would have done this, so and so would have done that. As you say, it doesn't matter. It's the person that counts. And thank you for talking about it. I appreciate how difficult it was. And obviously, I spoke with Callum Eilert. He had a different view of it because obviously he was coming through the wreckage and everything. And so, thank you for telling us sort of a different viewpoint of it. And obviously, we'll not forget Antoine, because we all love watching him race. Unfortunately, I didn't get to meet him, but it sounds like he was a guy more than worth knowing, and that's how he should be remembered for sure. Okay, in happier subject, I'm not saying leaving Renault is a happy thing. You know what I mean? You joined the Williams Driver Academy. We've already had some experience of F1 machinery by this point. Was it a decision that was right at the time? Was it just something that came up, to get on board with Williams? Because I'm going to hold my hand up. Williams are my local team. I know they're your local team as well. And I've been a fan of Williams for ages. So personally, I was very pleased when you joined Williams.
Yeah, I mean, it had a lot of hints of my decision to move from ART to Campos, in the sense that Renault I'd been with for 4 years at that point, for full seasons. There was an offer to stay in some capacity, but it was again in the light of no, I was going to say I'd had what I felt was quite a good season with Campos. We had 3 wins and five podiums, I think, overall, and I felt like that was my last real stab at I think I'm deserving of a chance, and I knew that Renault were looking at replacing drivers at that time, and it was made pretty clear to me that at least in the short term, that there wasn't an opportunity there. I was offered a chance to stay and carry on in a capacity, but it wasn't the capacity that I wanted, and it wasn't with the level of support that I wanted. And Williams, on the other hand, were very keen to have me come and join them, both in a testing capacity for the F1 team and also to support me in another season in F2. So, it felt like the right time to make a change. And I was, willing to take a risk a little bit there. So, made that change and came into a new academy, but in a very different position to when I joined Renault, as the not the oldest person in that academy, because it had some interesting figures in it at that time, but kind of make that final in what I knew were, getting on to be my last chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just feels like it was the right step at the right time, and also being installed as reserve driver. I was aware of the time we got lots still to get through. Being installed as reserve driver at Williams, obviously it heightens the possibility of getting behind the wheel. Now, you'd already done a bit of testing with Renault. How did it how did it compare when you got behind the wheel in FP1 at the Styrian Grand Prix, I believe it was? I mean, obviously being told you're going to get behind the wheel, that must be pretty cool on a Grand Prix weekend for FP1. I mean, yeah, how did it compare to just running some test laps, which I believe you'd done in, was it Barcelona? I think for Renault, if I do
I've
correct.
done a few tests, maybe only a couple of official tests, but honestly, it was interesting, but it felt like it went very quickly because an FP1 is basically for a driver, it's 3 runs. It's your first baseline run to get a feel for the car. Your second run on a softer compound, usually, which isn't a quali sim, but it's a step in that direction with lower fuel and a better tire, and maybe trying a change on the car as well. And then you do a long run, not a really long run, maybe it's only 10 laps or so, but that was the format that Williams were using at the time. So you got 3 runs, and really to set your fastest headline time, you've got 2 runs because the long run, you're obviously not going to go faster. So it's a lot of pressure in a short amount of time to put yourself in the shop window, but more importantly, probably not crash the car and make a serious mess with only a handful of hours before they have to get ready for FP2 in a car that you're borrowing. I really knew that I was borrowing it because Williams at that time had 2 very tall drivers, George Russell and Nicholas Latifi. And I, by comparison, I have short, stubby legs. So I had to have a hack on the pedal box because it couldn't come close enough to me, where they effectively just glued on a massive spacer to the pedal. Do not try this at home, kids. It was F1 spec glue, so I'm sure it was very safe, but it was a spacer nonetheless, because that was the best solution that we could come up with in the short time that we had. And I honestly couldn't tell you. It was during COVID time, so there wasn't a big crowd or any crowd, I think. It didn't really have that atmosphere that I had experienced in other sessions like that. I was just focused on trying to do the job and do it as well as I can. So it was an interesting experience, but not that different to the testing that I'd done before in a lot of ways.
Okay. Just a quick word on F1 machinery. And you drove, was it the RS18? I think it was with Renault, and then you drove the 2020 spec car, Williams. When you get behind the wheel of an F1 car, I mean, I remember again going back to Callum. When he got in the Alfa Romeo, he was sitting in there in the pit, ready to go out, thinking, "Bloody hell, this is happening! I'm going out in an F1 car." I mean, did you get that same kind of? Did the kid in you come out and really kind of come to the surface and sort of just give you that excitement, that kind of, oh my God?
I think on some occasions, definitely it has. Like the first ever test I did was a private test in an older car, and 100% the kid was out in full force then, especially because it's a private test with. It was a separate test team that were more friends to me than the proper race team, and I could afford to be a bit of a kid, so that was really nice. I think, and I mentioned that because by the time that I did the FP1, it was a little bit different. I'd done a lot of testing or a decent amount of testing in other machinery. So actually, I didn't really have that moment in that particular session. It was 100% like, I've got a run plan and not a lot of time to do it. So I was very focused on that at the time. First test that 2012 Lotus Renault, which had the old V8 in it, and I went out and did an install lap, and the engineer, a guy called Dom, came on the radio and he said, "How was that, Jack?" And very factual, he's got a very level voice, like many engineers, and not to stereotype. But I replied with, "That was fucking brilliant," or something along those lines. Excuse my French.
Brilliant.
Because they're asking, it was an install run to check, do your radio check to see you can reach all points of the circuit, get through all the gears, make sure they're all working, is the DRS flap working, etc. But obviously, the little kid in me who's jumping up and down, and it's you've just done your first lap in an F1 car. What other answer can you give? So the answer is it depends on the situation, but definitely for certain tests and times, 100%.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I love that because we're all still kids at heart, aren't we? And just, to be able to go out in F1 and to be in an F1 car and go and do that and feel the power and the downforce and the braking and everything must be fantastic. Now, obviously, in your role as reserve and test driver at Williams, you did a lot like sim work and things like that, which I've read elsewhere. Now, I've always wanted to ask a reserve or test driver this, so forgive me. When you're sitting there on a race weekend and it was George and Nicholas were in the car, do you ever find yourself thinking, "Oh, go on, just sprain an ankle or pull a hamstring or do nothing too major? Just give me." Does it ever, even for a millisecond, enter your head going, "Come on, I fancy a chance"?
I think I can honestly say I never wished harm on anybody, but absolutely, if you ever had a hint of it, because there's a few occasions where you would get put on standby because something had happened, whether that was, he's walked into a door and he's hurt his shoulder, just be on alert. Can you fly out just in case? Or he had food poisoning last night. We don't know if he's going to be able to drive. Can you fly out just in case? So I had a few of those. And as soon as you get that call or that inkling that something might have happened, then you're into full-blown hysteria trying to will it to happen, that you'll get in the car. Because at that point, it's happened. They've fallen down the stairs, as it were. So you're just hoping that you get a chance. But I don't think I ever went as far as lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone to trip over. But it's a pretty horrible existence as a reserve driver. I don't know if you spoke with Callum or with other reserve drivers about it, but
briefly with Callum, he said the same thing. He said he just wanted to be racing, and he said it was great being around it, but he said it was the best and the worst. It was great being all around it, but then you're not in it, and it's just like.
I would definitely more on the worst side of it, because it's. I did it for Renault for 2 years, and then, as you said, I did it for Williams for that year. And the first handful of races that you do it's brilliant because, I'm going to roll back. I would say the first weekend, it's brilliant because you get to meet everyone. You're in the paddock, you're in the thick of it, you're learning a lot, you're having your eyes open to tons of stuff, processes that you didn't have access to before, data that you didn't have access to before, all of that, and it's great. And then slowly you get used to it. You get used to being in the F1 paddock and seeing all these people, having access to all of these amazing things, having access to the pit lane, the driver comms and radio behind the scenes. And pretty quickly, it just becomes a job that you travel out to sit around and literally be a spare part for. There is no job that a reserve driver does except wait for a call up because he needs to replace someone. You cannot help the team in any way. You can't do anything in the meantime except for maybe some commentary and punditry work, but even that's pretty limited when you're representing a certain team. You're just waiting constantly and just hanging around. And that's a horrible existence for anyone that's had to do that I don't think that a professional capacity that doesn't exist in many industries. But to be spare, just hang around a place, hang around a group of people because you have to be there, but you're not really doing anything. It's horrible. I hated it. So I was lucky to combine it with F2, but I still
Yeah.
had a lot of races where I went and did nothing basically.
Yeah, sure. I can imagine that, and it's perhaps not the the dream it appears to be for those of us looking in from the outside on paper. However, 2020, a chap called Hamilton gets COVID. Obviously, we don't wish it on people. And obviously it was now obviously George's Mercedes and he's Williams driver and your reserve, and in Bahrain for the Sakir Grand Prix, also the week after Roman's accident, which we're very glad he got out of. When did you have an inkling or a murmuring that you might be stepping in for a Grand Prix weekend to actually race?
To be honest, so when the news first broke, sorry, I didn't think much of it because, as you pointed out, Hamilton, or rather Mercedes, had a reserve driver in Stoffel, I think it was at that time, where it was a shared role with a few drivers. So I really didn't think anything of it. It just didn't occur to me what might happen. And then George actually messaged me.
Mercedes thing.
Yeah, but George actually messaged me later that night saying, "Hey, just so you know, this might be happening, as in he might be going to the Merc, and therefore I might be jumping in his seat." So then I put in some calls to Williams, and it was confirmed that it might be happening. It might not be happening. It depended on a few contractual things. And I had to just sit and wait. And they said, "We'll call you in the morning and let you know. But, you're better off just leaving it to us and get some sleep." So obviously I didn't sleep. And then was up early the next morning and I got the call that, it was going to happen. And I best come in and start preparing. That was, I had the anticipation, and it kind of built through those calls of realizing that it was going to be a possibility. So it was a very surreal moment, but you had a lot of that anticipation building as it was coming.
Yeah, and those days leading up to it must have been so exciting. And obviously, you get in the car, you do the practice and the qualifying run, and I mean, I guess it must have been manic. But I mean, did you ever get a moment to just sort of on the weekend at any point just think, "Wow, I'm an F1 driver this weekend"? Because it must have been crazy for you.
It was pretty flat out. Like I've mentioned a couple of other times, I was pretty focused on just doing the job, and I was happy to commit myself to that. And there was enough going on and enough to do to get up to speed for that weekend, that it was pretty easy for me to not fall into that place of just sitting back and going, "Wow," because for sure you want to do that a little bit, but it wasn't the time. The first time I probably really did it after getting the call was on the starting grid for the race, because all the drivers, you do your reconnaissance lap, you get out, you go to the front of the grid to do the national anthem. And I was stood there with a few guys that had come from F2 that I knew fairly well. And then there's a few guys there that I watched when I was a kid, like Seb, who was kind enough to give me a fist bump on our way to the back of the grid because he hadn't qualified so well on that occasion. And Kimmy was around me. He was the row behind me or beside, I can't remember, but that was surreal. And you take a moment then for sure just to take it in and say, "Yeah, this is about to happen." And then after the weekend, again, you have time to reflect, and when everything's died down, that's a good time that you can actually sit back and look at what you've done.
Yeah, I think that happened. And obviously in the in the actual race itself, and it looked like you got into like a pretty good groove. You were making up some ground, and it was all going well. I mean, obviously you're focused on the job and you're relaying stuff to the team, things like that. But I mean, the little pirouette aside, I mean, you must have been pretty happy with how the race went.
Yeah, I think, but it took me. I'm not sure how long, probably weeks, to realise that, because being competitive and being human, I was completely focused and distraught over that pirouette and the mistake that I'd made. And I think it was, it was just unfortunate, but and it was natural for me to be upset at that because I felt like, that was a big chance and I felt like I'd ruined it to an extent. But realistically, when I had time to calm down and think about it, I looked back at the job that I did the rest of the weekend in practice qualifying, dealing with the team, the race up to that point and after it, and I'm pretty proud of what I did. And I can walk away saying, I did the best that I could in those circumstances, pirouette included, and that's just part of my story now. I'm happy that I had the chance to do it when so many people don't get that chance. I was very lucky, and
Yeah.
not just lucky. Like I say, I am proud of what I did, and I can be happy in that. But took a bit of time after the race, that's for sure.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and you should be absolutely proud of it. I mean, you finished higher than where you started, despite a bit of misfortune. And Jim McKendrick just said that you did great, and at least you didn't lose it. I'm not going to say the rest of the message, but at least you didn't have a brain a brain mess. And it was great to see you out there. I loved it. It was great seeing another Brit racing for Williams. So, yeah, great stuff.
That was a special thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely cool stuff. I'm aware of the time, but I mean, we're just going to accelerate a bit more. I mean, obviously, that was the end of 2020 into 2021. Obviously, was still as a Williams test and reserve driver. You made a major career move. It looks major from the outside. I'm not sure if you see it as one, but because you weren't racing regularly, you moved to GT sports car, that whole world, which is going through a bit of a boom at the moment. Was it simply a case of getting an opportunity to go racing and some money and just do what you wanted to do as a racer rather than just be involved with F1 for the sake of being involved with F1?
Yeah, I mean, I would say by holding on to that Williams test and reserve role, I was still trying to be involved in F1. Not maybe, I don't know, probably a little bit for the sake of being involved in F1, because realistically, my chances were rapidly fading for a race seat, even with the Grand Prix start in Sakir. But I wanted to hold on to it. I hadn't quite let go of that dream yet, like a lot of people struggle with, understandably. And Williams were very willing to keep me on in that role, and they were great about that. I almost want to say they were generous in that, but I did do a good job for them on the testing side of things and the simulator side of things. So there was a value to them for that as well. And keeping the reserve role obviously gave me another chance if something did happen. The the move to GT was one that was purely. It was a budget thing. Yet again, I'd done 2 seasons with Campos on what you would call a shoestring budget in modern terms. That doesn't often happen just because of the realities of Formula 2 and Formula 3 and how expensive they are. But Campos managed to do it. I loved my time with them, but they couldn't do it again. And I was also recognizing that it would be somewhat ridiculous to do a 4th season in Formula 2 because there was nothing more for me to prove or to do there. And it felt like, in my mind, it was still aiming to be as complete a driver and as good a driver as I could be for a Formula 1 seat. That the right thing to do was to do something different. And there was an opportunity in GT racing. So that's what I ended up taking.
Yeah, and it was in a very decent series, in the GT World Challenge Europe, and you got behind the wheel of a Lamborghini Huracan, very cool car. Again, I mean, we talked about the shift from karts to cars and different types of single-seater to different types of single-seater. That must have been a different beast as well, getting behind the bigger, sort of heavier GT car, completely different style of driving. Did you take to it quite quickly?
It was about half a day, which for a driver, I don't say that as an impressive thing. For a driver, that can be quite a long time, especially one that had as much experience as I had up to that point. And the thing that probably a whole day, actually, because it was a 2-day test in Valencia. And the thing I really struggled with was the ABS and to a lesser extent the traction control, which all GT3 cars have, but they're not the most sophisticated systems. So there's a bit of an art to using the ABS and the TC in a way that it actually gains you lap time rather than restricts it. And I didn't get that at all. I found it really weird when I first jumped in. And then I came back the second day, and I think in all walks of life, it's true that a night's sleep can solve a lot of things. And I was very, very fast the next day, I was happy to say, which helped, convince the team that the single-seater driver was worth a go. And thereafter, I was not bad in the GT stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And just very quickly, got a comment here from Marcus Harding. Hi, Marcus. Says, yeah, not many get an opportunity to actually race in F1 these days. Respect. Clearly, the Williams is not very competitive, so expecting more than you achieved in the race is just unrealistic, if not impossible. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I
exactly
agree.
That. You did
It was the car's fault that I went in the barrier.
We'll go with that.
Marcus, you're right on my line of thinking. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, spot on. You got everything out the car that you could. You just needed a better car.
And then
there
a
you
bit
go.
more.
Simple
Yeah.
as that. Just want to fast forward quickly to again. You had some pretty solid results in 2021 with the Lamborghini and finding the feet, the team, and everything. It came to a bit of a sudden halt, didn't it? I mean, again, we keep talking negatively about Spa. It was very close to where Antoine had his accident. You had your own big accident, and you unfortunately suffered some injuries. Of all the places to have an accident at Spa, I'm not saying you did it on purpose. That's going to come across completely wrong. Of all the places to have an accident at Spa, Eau Rouge Raidillon isn't the best one to do it, but because of the way the circuit is, it's most likely with the car bottoming out, going light, etc., etc. It was a big one, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a massive one. Yeah, I mean, fortunately we're in a position where we can talk about it lightheartedly,
yes,
which is always nice. Yes. But it was a huge shunt, and it's one of the few accidents that I've had where I do feel a little bit emotional to an extent. I don't mean I'm emotional as in tears coming out kind of thing. I mean I do just have a bit of a reaction to it because it was so big, and it's one of the few accidents where I really felt in danger for a little bit of time because I mean the way the accident happened, just to run through for those who don't know. It was at the start of the 24 Hours of Spa, one of the biggest races in the GT3 calendar. Big field, very competitive, and it's run like a sprint race for 24 hours. I was the starting driver after a good quali, which I'd run as well. And during my opening stint, I went through Eau Rouge, had a little bit of bottoming. We also had some issues with the power steering that weekend. So there was some badly timed power steering cuts. I lost the car, overcorrected, and went into the barrier at the top of Eau Rouge, and it spat me back out onto the track. So I had one big impact from the barrier, which was I got a compression fracture in my vertebra, just from being bent over that much in the car because it was a head-on collision. And then I was over the blind crest on the racing line, and I had about 40 cars behind me, so they all came through, and actually my teammate was unfortunate to hit me in the rear. Luckily, the safest part of the car to get hit. and then my car was kind of lifted off the ground, landed, and was spinning again. And then I think it was my teammate was Frank Pereira, an old name from single seaters as well. Very handy GT driver. Then it was Davide Rigon and Kevin Estra, I think. I can't remember, one of the Porsche guys.
Okay.
So quite the list of names in this accident. Not adding my own in there, but
if you're going to get hit by people,
exactly,
you're going to get hit by some good names, I suppose. I mean,
and I have to apologise because poor Davide also suffered a fractured vertebra, though not quite as severe. But he hit me in my in the driver's side door, and that was it drove me into my seat, the bucket seat, and compressed my shoulder, and I basically shattered my collarbone. So I still have a plate to this day, which I could probably take out now, but it's a hassle. So there's three very big hits, and once the dust had settled, I was off the racing line, but I was only a couple of meters away, and there were still cars coming through at speed because, unfortunately, the modern driver doesn't lift as much as they should for a yellow flag. So people were still coming through very quick. And Eau Rouge is a tough one because if you lift in Eau Rouge, you lose a ton of time all the way down the Kemmel Straight. So it's somewhat understandable. But I was pretty scared because after the accident, when everything settles and you're not in the moment anymore, where you don't really have time to be scared, I was sat there. Some parts of me were hurting a lot. There was barely anything left of the car. There was no door, no windshield. Front end was gone. The engine and the gearbox was gone. I was covered in fuel because one of the lines had ruptured when the engine was sheared from the chassis. So you could smell it everywhere, and it was burning. Not on fire. It was just that sensation of fuel on your skin. And there were still cars flying past you, and you're just thinking, this is a fucking terrible situation to be in. This is really, 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 really bad. If I get hit again, it might be just don't want to think about it. Luckily, that didn't happen. I had help come very quickly, and they took me off to hospital. But I think you're talking about the fact that it was at Eau Rouge in a very similar spot to Antoine, the other side of the track, but very similar. I think it was harder for my family and friends who had also been through that with Antoine, and then they had to be the ones that were hearing about it. They never got to see the accident because it wasn't broadcast, but they heard about it, and they have that. I don't know what it was. It was maybe 20 minutes where they didn't have any information, where my team weren't being told anything about my condition, just that I'd been in a serious accident and I was being taken to the medical centre, and that was the only update they had. That was all they could tell my family, and that was pretty terrible for them. That was really hard for them. So obviously, turned out okay.
You sort of, I guess your family, you naturally go to the worst case scenario, especially given the location and what had happened before. Yeah, wow. And obviously, there was the recovery period, which I guess was zero fun. I mean, you were in a body or back brace for a while, weren't you, and stuff like that, and it must have been pretty horrible. And that's the bits we don't see, is the recovery from these injuries, these big ones. Juan Manuel Correa had it, things like that, and it can't be easy. But you're still here at the end of it, which is the most important thing, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, for sure. Just buzz on to 2022. Just a couple of years ago, you got back into the race seat. I guess there was no ill effect, sort of mentally or anything, or physically. Once you got back in the seat, it was like, right, I want to go racing again, and let's go.
Pretty much, it was okay. I think with a big accident like that, you might have a couple of small. You have some survival instinct kicking in. If anyone has an accident, if you fall off your bike, if you have a near miss of a car hitting you or whatever, it's natural that you have a response because your body doesn't want that to happen again. So the only time I had any was when we returned to Spa the next year, and the very first times going through Eau Rouge, not the first time ever, it was the first times I went through at pace and started to get some slides, which in a GT car you will get because it's not quite flat out, and you're on the limit. And the first time you get those little slides from the rear, I had a alarm bell going off saying, no, don't want to be there. And that lasted, thankfully, for an hour or two, and then I was okay. So pretty minimal by all standards.
Yeah, good stuff. Just fast forward a quick. I mean, you had a victory at Zandvoort that year, another very cool circuit, especially with the updates they've made to it. That must have felt like kind of coming full circle, you know, having had the accident, recovering, getting back in the car, and getting back on top of the podium. Must have been a hugely satisfying win.
It was. I think it was almost more just from the point of view of that was my first win in GTs, which had taken a while. But it was testament to how competitive the scene is and how much you need the complete package, car, team, and your teammates. But I actually had more that feeling of recovering from the accident the last race of 21 because I was on the podium for a GT World Challenge endurance race in Barcelona. And that felt like an achievement because that was also my first race back. And it felt like something that we shouldn't have been able to do. And then by the time we got to Zandvoort in 22, it already felt like a long time ago.
Yeah, sure. Felt like it had been a long time coming, but and these little, you know, things, you know, like podiums where you think, oh, we're not really going to be challenging, and then you get one, it's a shot in the arm, it's a confidence boost, and it leads to things like Zandvoort and things like that, which is great. I want to touch on quickly. Did 5 races, 5 rounds in the European Le Mans Series for Team Turkey in the Orica LMP2. Now, I love the LMP2 cars; they look absolutely brilliant to drive. I guess that was something that you enjoyed once you got behind the wheel of it, and it was again another car and another challenge, and yeah, how was it to drive?
It was great. Sorry, that's my lovely fiance returning from work. So because we've gone longer than I expected, so she might make a surprise surprise appearance. No, that's all right. Yeah, the LMP2 is a great car. It feels very nimble, very light on its feet, lighter than its numbers would suggest, and a lot of downforce for its lap time. So I loved it. I'd always wanted to get into prototypes in some form because that felt closer to my roots with single seaters. And LMP2 is also lovely in that it's completely free of the politics of BOP. You know, I'm not here to slate BOP. I think it's a good process most of the time. But there is something lovely and simple about the LMP2 class only having that, for the most part, one chassis, and you know it's up to the teams and the drivers. Therefore,
yeah, I mean, which I quite like. I mean, there's a lot of slating goes around, often from F1 fans and fans of other series, about one make series or single chassis series or spec series or things or whatever you want to call them. I'm quite a big fan of them because it, as you say, it sort of separates the best engineers and drivers, and who can put something together on a much more level playing field. And obviously, you had some like success in it. I did have a look. Actually, you were officially second in the championship. You personally, whereas your two teammates were as champions. That's how it's officially done because of the races that you did. But it was a cracking season, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's a cracking little run.
It was that. It finished that way because I had to miss one race because trying to remember why I had to miss one race. It must have been a clash with my GT calendar, but I don't know why I would have done that. But anyway, I missed one race, so they scored they drafted in background. At the end of year and end of year results where they were first, and as a team we were first, but I knocked off some poor team from the podium and took a whole spot for myself. Got a trophy for myself for second place, which I didn't think I really should have had. I should have had first or nothing, in my humble opinion. And this poor team that had finished, to all intents and purposes, third on the podium in the championship got nothing. So I did feel a bit bad for them, but it was a good season. I enjoyed the car. Hello, that's Alex. And the team were a lot of fun. It's run by a British team, despite the name TF Sport.
Okay, in Turkey. Okay,
yeah, and it's Team Turkey because our bronze-rated driver Salih Yolic is Turkish and proud, and he put in a stellar performance as well. He was clearly the best bronze driver that year, and as some people might know, in those pro-am categories, it's really the am that will win or lose you the race, because the difference between a good am and a bad amateur is really big compared to professionals.
Yeah, absolutely, and to have a top draw am driver obviously helped a lot. But yeah, great to have some success in another form of racing as well. Subject of prototypes, you made your Le Mans debut in the Algarve Pro team. That must have been a terrific experience. Your first experience of the great 24-hour race. I've spoken to a lot of people who have raced in it. I've spoken to a few winners of it, and they've all said that there's nothing like it. Even guys like Emanuele Pirro. Okay, he's won it 6 times, but he enjoyed his time at F1, as did David Brabham, as did Stefan Johansson, and guys like that. But they say that racing at Le Mans, even racing at it, is right up there with anything else that they've achieved. I mean, how did you find your first experience of it?
Yeah, amazing. I would agree with everything said there, because it's one of the few events in motorsport where I think for the majority of the drivers and the teams that take part, the event as a living thing is way bigger than the individual drivers or the teams or the cars. It covers such a scale, just in geographic terms, the amount of people that come, the length of the event being, it's over a week long. You've got all of the pomp and fare and celebration around it. It completely blew me away, because it was the first time I'd been there either as a fan or a driver. Oh,
really? Okay.
Yeah, and it lived up to expectations completely. And the track itself as well, you almost forget as a driver, and I think as a fan, that it is a proper street circuit, which means that when you first get onto the track for the first practice session, it's filthy and there's no grip at all. You're piloting these LMP2 cars around, which are pretty nimble and very grippy by most standards, and it was treacherous. You're locking up everywhere. The crown of the road is so severe on those French country roads that if you go off center, the thing's pulling you into the barrier because it's that severe, the camber, and you're grounding out everywhere as you cross the crowns. The first night practice going through the Porsche curves is terrifying, because it's nearly flat out in the LMP2 car. You're doing well over 250 kilometers an hour through that section, and they have it's harder than pure darkness, is they have floodlights at certain sections of the Porsche curves.
Right, the glare.
Because of the glare, and obviously your eyes can adapt to the dark by widening the pupils. But if you shine a bright light in it, all of a sudden you get blinded, and then you take the light away, and suddenly you can't see in the dark anymore. And that's the experience that you have going through the Porsche curves, because they've got those flashlights, floodlights. So it's a completely terrifying experience to try and go quick as a rookie around Le Mans, which is how it should be. I think it's brilliant. But as the week goes on and you get more confidence, it becomes a place that you just love. And I was in a fortunate situation that it was quite a low pressure debut for me at Le Mans. It's with a team that they put out brilliant race cars, APR,
Yeah.
But they're not a big team with massive resource. And I was in a Pro-Am car as well with John Falb, who's an American bronze driver,
Yeah.
and Sophia Floch as the other pro. I think we punched well above our weight, but we had an actuator failure on the very first lap, on the formation lap, actually, would you believe it? Which Sophia then had to crawl around, stuck in second gear, the whole lap pretty much, bring
Wow.
it into the
Long
pits,
lap as well.
fix it, and then go. Yeah, we lost 15 or 20 minutes straight away, which was pretty gutting because then you're just on the back foot from the word go. But we had a flawless race after that, and it was quite an emotional experience because we put
Yeah.
our all into it. We came quite close to salvaging a result. Sophia and John were fantastic and really well with them personally as well, which is important in a 24-hour race, more so than most. And it was quite a special week for me actually. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, brilliant. And obviously on the back of coming back from injury, things like that as well. All those little things add to it, which obviously like Sophia had done as well after her crash in Macau. That was absolutely bonkers, wasn't it? Even, yeah, it's still absolutely incredible. Let's have a quick look here. Marcus, he said that, yeah, Jack was absolutely stunning in that race. Followed every stint that year because of you and Sophia, and you guys were amazing. So, yeah, fully agree with that. Absolutely fantastic performance. Very quickly on to 2023, last year, DTM. Now, I love DTM. I've loved DTM for a long time because I'm old. I remember all the cars in the late 80s and early 90s, and it's absolutely brilliant. And it had a bit of a wobble for a couple of years, but it's on its way back. You got into Emil Frey racing with the Ferrari 296. How did it come about? Very quickly.
Emil Frey was the team that I've been racing GTs with for the last couple of years. So
Yeah,
it was
it was a pretty.
partly good fortune, that they decided that they wanted to have a crack at it. Simultaneously, we left the Lamborghinis and took on the Ferraris as they brought in the 296 as their new GT3 car. And it was as fortuitous as that, as being in the right place at the right time. They were, I was grateful. They trusted me to put me into the DTM. As soon as they mentioned it as a possibility, I was very keen to do it because it's quite a unique series in the landscape of GT3. Like you mentioned, it's not what it once was with the effectively prototype cars, which I did get to. I drove them as part of the Autosport Award because they used to have the Mercedes DTM cars as part of the test, and they were incredible machines. So not quite to that level, but the standard of racing and the quality of driver is just as competitive as it has ever been. And you obviously don't have to share the car, which is quite nice for a change. So yeah, that was how it came about.
Yeah, cool. And I mean, you hit the ground running at Oschersleben.
Mm-hmm.
Try saying that with your dentures in. Podium straight off the bat. Third. Pretty cool start and a really underrated circuit, I think. Just from having watched it, it's one that doesn't get mentioned. I think it's a cool circuit.
Yeah, it's one of the cool things about DTM is that it's a real. It's gone back to its roots a little bit with proper. It's a national series that goes to national level circuits. So you do have your Hockenheims, your Nürburgrings, but you also get to go to places that I'd never heard of before. Lausitz Ring, Oschersleben,
Yeah.
Sachsen Ring, which MotoGP fans will know, but not for car racing, and stuff like that. And Norris Ring is another great one. It's a different style of racing than being on the Grand Prix circuit. So I think for the GT cars, it's fantastic because you're climbing over curves, you're dipping wheels in the grass. That's the kind of driving that a GT car can really excel at and can be really spectacular. Versus a Silverstone nowadays for GT racing, it can be brilliant, but at the same time, track limits abuse and the fact that the cars aren't quite as fast at those high downforce tracks are not as spectacular. So I love the DTM calendar. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of love in the comments for DTM. People coming in saying that, yeah, fantastic. But obviously, slightly frustrating period of races, but then it all came together at the Lausitz ring. It was just one of those weekends where it all fell into place from the looks of it. It just was it fastest lap, pole, fastest lap, and a win for Ferrari in the DTM. What a cool weekend that must have been.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was really nice to add my name to list of DTM winners because I've got a soft spot for the series in a historical sense. You know, I think I was the first DTM winner since Jamie Green, who I watched on TV as a kid, racing in DTM. So
I didn't
that
realize
was
that.
cool. Yeah, yeah, and I think the you know it was nice to do it in a dominant way as well. I really enjoyed driving it that weekend. But the reality was, you know, we like you say, we hit the ground running in the first race with a podium. We were because the 296 was a new GT3 car. The BOP for it was a bit more. The organisers weren't quite sure where it should stand, and I think they overreacted a little bit to that first race, where it's like, oh, out the box they've done quite well. That's not not sure that's normal. When in fact I think we just did a really good job, and
Yeah.
Oschersleben also suits the Ferrari's characteristics, which is a fast and flowing circuit that is quite twisty. So we got hit quite hard for the next few races and were kind of nowhere, which was really frustrating. And then we started to get some breaks back in the BOP, and Lausitz Ring was kind of the culmination of that and finding our feet again and hitting our stride. And it was almost a bit of a relief to be back at the front more than anything.
Yeah, sure. And obviously, you guys definitely delivered that weekend. I mean, I wouldn't say it was an easy win, but it was one of the more comfortable looking ones from the outside.
Yeah.
Which are the nice ones. Cool. Just again, fast forward. You've gone on from there. Mutterings of a potential return this year, but we're not going to go into that because obviously there's all kinds of things that go on before that can happen. But you've gone on to IMSA and running in the Cadillac and things like that. I mean, absolutely fantastic time to be involved in the prototype world. I mean, it's going through a real boom. They just look like absolutely brilliant cars to drive, these hypercar style machines. And you won a quite famous race at Sebring over the bumps. I mean, just what's it like at Sebring in these cars? Because it does look fantastic, and that's on my bucket list for sure.
I think Sebring's one of those rare occasions where it probably looks as bad as it actually is, because often it can be the kind of thing that maybe it's got the reputation, but when you hit the track, it's not really that bad. It is that bad at Sebring. It's pretty amazing.
So bumpy, isn't it?
The abuse, yeah. And I love that they've left it that way. It's become, the identity of Sebring, and long may it continue. It's not unsafe. It's just really difficult, and the cars take a lot of abuse. But it's a really cool place. It's a completely unique challenge. The last corner and the first corner are both slightly terrifying if you catch the bumps in the wrong way, and there is a very narrow line that you have to take to get the most out of the car. So it's a cool challenge.
Yeah, and to have the win on the CV as well. I mean, it's one of those races I think that flies under the radar when people talk about the great races, like Indy 500, Daytona, Bathurst, and all these other ones. I think it deserves more recognition because it's a superb event for so many different types of cars, different styles of races, and just I just think it needs pushing more, certainly on these shores, because it's a cracking event, isn't it?
I'd agree. I mean, I think it's one of the races that has, I don't know what descriptor to use here, probably because I'm getting a bit fuzzy now, but it's mental. The crowd is really passionate and enthusiastic about the tagline Sebring respect the bumps. It's everywhere. The infield is actual motorhome, set up their own bars for people to enjoy.
Oh, wow.
It's like the times, and because the race starts midday and goes into the atmosphere to it. So I would fully recommend Sebring to the traveling endurance fan. I think it's right up there for a driver in terms of getting it on the CV. So I feel really lucky to have got it so early on. The only warning that I'll put out there is Middle Florida, which is where Sebring is. There's not a lot there apart from Sebring. It's accommodation is notoriously hard to find, even for the teams. We really struggle, and you're
Right.
not going to find much in the high end cuisine or hotel category there. So just be prepared for that and plan early if you are going to go.
Get it booked early. Absolutely doing it. Yeah, Jim McKendrick has just said that it's out in the swamps. Yes.
I mean,
right.
I was trying to be polite to Sebring locals, but yeah, it is basically in the swamps.
Right. Two very final things. Daytona this year. I spoke to your Autosport. You hadn't gone to Daytona at that point. I was willing you to win the race, and it so nearly happened. I mean, it was just one of those bad luck things at the end with the late caution and the fire for the Lexus. You guys put in an absolutely superb performance, you and Pippo and Tom. It must have been so annoying. It must have been so frustrating at the end there. Yeah. I can't even imagine.
It's a funny one because at the end of a 24-hour race, I haven't decided. I haven't done enough of them. I've only done 3 or 4 so far. But at the end of a 24-hour race, you either have a kind of clarity on things or you're just delusional. I can't quite decide which, because I felt very almost at peace with it. Of course, you're a bit frustrated, and it was like, it would have been so nice to add that to my CV so early in my career. But at the same time, we got beat fair and square. There was a little bit of luck to it, but ultimately, the number 7 Porsche they were fast all day. Particularly, Nasser and Campbell were both on fire. They were really strong every time they got in the car, and we knew going into the final round of pit stops that we would have to take on slightly more fuel than them, just with the way that the previous pit stops had worked out. So we were trying to build a bit of a gap to them on track to keep track position when we came out. And the caution just killed us because it bunched up the field, and it basically guaranteed that they would jump us in the stops. And the Porsche's strengths were top end and on speed on the banking, where we were stronger in the infield. So Tom tried his best, bless him, and he did a mega job, amazing drive.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough, and he couldn't pass them. So, like I say, we got beaten. I hopefully have a number of attempts left in me, and we can just see.
Yeah, hopefully you can win it next time out. And the same goes, for the 24 Hours of Le Mans this year, which you're back in. And as you say, a bit of luck if it comes your way, then hopefully there's plenty of time for it to come your way. Very quickly, I've got to talk about one thing. Otherwise, a guy in the comments, James Harmon, is going to slap me because he loves his Formula E. You did. You raced for Envision Racing. I know that's his team. Something you enjoyed, Formula E?
Yeah, it's something I've always been curious about, just because it's so different, and the cars are now quite advanced compared to where they started. I think the Gen 1 cars, by all accounts, were pretty scary things to have to drive. But now they're a lot more sophisticated, and they're really impressive with what they can do. I think they're beyond F1 in a lot of the technological equipment that they have available to them to tune the car and set up the car, and for the driver to play with as well. And it's a lot of information to take on. So it was really interesting. Potentially, I may still do some more of that in the future.
Cool.
But it was something that I'd wanted to try for a while, so that was a nice opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone's just called it milk float racing. That's very unfair. No, it's it's a cool series, and it'd be. I think if that was your milk float, you'd never go thirsty again. Yeah, right. Okay, we've gone longer than had planned. Apologies because you've had a long day as well. But we always try and wrap up with just some fun questions.
Do you want me to whiz through? There are a couple of other very quick questions which I can do quick fire answers to, just so people aren't angry in the comments.
If you wish, yeah, absolutely. It's entirely up to you. Yeah,
quickly. There's Chris Josie asked, does he think he'll get back to F1 if there is a chance? If there is a chance, of course. Do I think I'll get a chance? Absolutely not. I think that time is well gone, and there are younger, very hungry guys in F2 who will take that chance.
Yeah, sure.
James said he would love to see me back in an open wheel. Never say never. Might do. They're very pure. That's pure racing. I would love to do it again. I think that was it. Yeah, that's probably it. All right.
They were the two I was going to come to. And Chris is a friend of mine, and he's a bit bigger than me. So if I've forgotten, he'd have slapped me as well. Yeah. So there you go, Chris. Good man. Okay, very quickly, just to wind down rapidly. You've done you've done F1 race, you've done Le Mans, you've done Daytona, you've done Sebring. Is there another bucket race you'd like to do? Whether it be like IndyCar, say the Indy 500, or Bathurst, or the Daytona 500. Is there anything that you think, yes, that one?
I think realistically, out of the ones that you've mentioned, Bathurst is pretty high on my list, and I have a mate, Thomas Randall, who's competing in supercars at the moment and doing a very fine job indeed. And
he's got a very cool livery as well, iconic livery this year.
The Castrol livery, we've been plotting how I might sneak my way into Bathurst one year, and maybe team up. But I think that potentially is a ways off. But yeah, I'd love to do it. Mount Panorama, have to visit and drive hopefully at least once. In terms of other races, Daytona 500, I would love to. I don't think realistically I'd ever do that, but what an atmosphere. It's a special event. Indy 500.
That's the next one on my bucket list, the Daytona 500.
I absolutely recommend that. But Indy 500 is kind of in a similar boat, weirdly, even though IndyCar is, closer to my home. I'm not super comfortable with oval racing, like a lot of Europeans. They call us soft. I say we potentially have more brain cells, but I get enough satisfaction from other types of racing. I don't see a need to take that extra risk as I see it. It's a really cool event. Got a lot of respect for it, but not for me.
Yeah. I've been once as a fan, and I've always said that I'd only go once, but I'm completely lying. I'd love to go again. It's incredible, but there's a lot of drivers that would step away from the Indy 500 for those reasons. Okay, have you got a favourite racing car you've ever driven?
F1 car. If I could choose to drive one car again, it would be probably the 2018 Renault, the RS18, because that was of the Renault cars that I drove, and I drove a few of them. That felt the best sorted, and it was also of the era of regulations that allowed for the most downforce. So it was pretty sweet, almost video game-esque to drive. But F1 feels a bit like a cop-out outside of F1. Probably single seaters like the old Dallara F312. That was a really, really nicely balanced chassis with loads of downforce and a real racer's car because it had a massive slipstream potential. So it was a lot of fun. I did a few races in those. The old World Series by Renault car, I did a couple of races in that before the series died for good. And it's a brilliant, really, really nice V8 with tons of downforce, a ton of drag as well. So it wasn't the fastest in a straight line, but that was another. Generally, high downforce cars, even if that's at the cost of power or straight line speed. They're the ones that are quite special to drive.
Yeah, the ones that are the ones that are a bit more glued. Okay, there's some more questions that I could ask here, but I'm going to ask one here. Oh, here's a good one. Okay, Lewis Hamilton, Ferrari, world champion. Yes or no? I mean, we'd love to see it, wouldn't we?
Oh yeah, it would be completely iconic, legendary. It would. It sounds crazy to say it for a guy that is matching the world championship record 7 times, but I think it would really define Lewis's career if he could go and turn that ship around in the way that Schumacher did, and I'm sure that's why he's chosen to go there to an extent and what he wants to do. And I would, like everyone, I would go nuts if he managed to do it, because I think it's a tall order, especially in the modern era of F1. So I think it's, if you put a gun to my head, I would probably bet. I don't know. I think Hamilton being there could draw the right people to Ferrari, and that could make the difference. Because right now it doesn't feel like they're capable, but maybe the right people go there and they all chase that same dream with Ferrari as the catalyst and Hamilton being there as the catalyst. It's hard. It's really hard.
No, I like that. That's a great answer. Someone's just said no. Someone's just said yes. Oh, who knows? It's going to be great to watch, whatever happens. Okay, final question. This is a terrible question, and I ask it to everyone, so don't worry. We've raced against a lot of drivers. I'm just going to name a few of them, not all of them here. You've raced against guys like Joseph Newgarden, Herta, Grosjean, O'Ward, James Collado, Rene Rast, Rockenfeller, Maxi Guts, and Van Tours, Andre Lotterer, Sebastian Bourdais, Scott Dixon, Jimmy Johnson, legend, Mike Conway, Kobayashi, Barnicoat, Bottas, Magnussen. Goodness me, Vettel, Raikkonen, Verstappen, Hamilton, Button, Norris, Leclerc. Many very good drivers that you've raced against or shared a track with. Are there any that stick out in your mind as being maybe not better, but just sort of special, or having that little something different that makes them just that little bit better or more special?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think naturally as a driver with any kind of ego, you tend not to give anyone that credit. Certainly when I was a younger driver, I never did, and I always felt like there was either it was in reach if I just did things a little bit differently, or there was another excuse, of which there are many. But it's a good question. I mean, where that year in F2 when it was we had Leclerc, George, Albon, Norris. I think those were the big ones. They're all pretty fantastic drivers, and I have more of a personal connection with them because we could kind of move through the ranks somewhat together. I don't know if I would put any of them in that category of saying that wow, they were really special, because like I said at the time, I kind of looked at them and was like, I can do that. But that's probably looking with the illusion of being a young guy with a lot of ambition. Now, more recently, some of the people that are really impressed. Actually, recently, I have to say Alex Palau in Daytona was really, really impressive. Because as far as I'm aware,
I had him on here just after he won his first title, and we'd arranged it in the middle of the season. And obviously, when he went through and won the championship, it was quite a big thing to have him on here. But he's just like metronomic, isn't he? He just
doesn't make mistakes. Yeah, and from speaking to the other guys who have raced against him in IndyCar, that they find that really frustrating, which is always a good sign for the other guy. And as far as I know, I don't know if this is true or not, but I think Daytona was the first time that he tested the LMDH Cadillac, and he did a phenomenal job.
I think it was.
He was fast and he was consistent. Not just fast, he was. I don't want to say he was the fastest in that car, because all of the guys in that car are brilliant, and I'm not confident enough of the statistics to put that out there. But if he wasn't the fastest, then he was right up there. So he did a brilliant job there, and that was a bit of looking at his lap times and thinking, yeah, how is he doing that? That's really good. Who else? Yeah, I mean, hard to pick out guys, so I'll probably leave it there. But um, I've had a good
Yeah.
list of drivers to compete against when you read them out.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've beaten a lot of them, most of them, which is great. Which is good. I've got Steve M over on Twitter saying that he enjoyed watching you drive against Sebastian Bourdais and Scott Dixon in the 2023 putting them on. Yes, absolutely. That was a
Yeah, having Scott
fantastic
Dixon shove you towards the pit lane wall, that was slightly surreal moment. But I was like, not happy with Scott at the
Yes.
time, but then afterwards we could laugh about it, so that's all right.
Yeah. Everyone got out with a smile on their face, and I think I've always said he's the most underrated driver of the last 20 odd years.
He was one of the guys that was on the tip of my tongue for your last question,
Yeah.
because what he's achieved, obviously I wasn't around racing him in IndyCar while he's been achieving all of that, but by all accounts it's pretty amazing. I mean, a lot of people, I think, are comparing Alex Palau as the new Scott Dixon, aren't they? A little bit. They're kind of a similar
Which is a
style of
pretty
driver,
major.
but
That's major praise, isn't it?
yeah. But it's also goes both ways, and like Scott to still be doing what he does so for so long in his career, and then to dabble in LMDH racing with Cadillac and consistently be one of the fastest guys is pretty impressive, to say the least.
Yeah, very impressive guys. Right, well, that I think is a good spot on which to stop and wrap up. So we've gone a little bit longer than we planned. This always happens. I think it's probably because it's me. I always want to know more about stuff. But I know you've had a long day and a lot of traveling. So thank you for sticking with us. And thank you for coming on and having a chat. It's been absolutely brilliant speaking with you.
It's my pleasure.
We'll obviously wish you well for the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is coming up, and whatever else you do this year. Just want to say thank you to everyone who's tuned in. Thank you very much for the comments and the questions. I hope we've covered it all. We're actually going to be back in just over 10 hours with Takuma Sato, which is lovely. A little bit last minute, which caught me on the hop. So if you're around at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, do come and join us. But yeah, thank you very much, guys. And again, Jack, many thanks to you. It's been great speaking with you. And thank you for your time, both at Autosport and this evening.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Like I said, thank you for letting me relive some of my finer moments from my career, because we don't do that. I personally don't do that often. So it's been a pleasure to do that, and good to see everyone pitching in on the live chat. Thanks for bearing with us for such a long time.
Yeah, sorry. This always happens with us. I can't help it. But no, the pleasure's been all ours. So thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you tomorrow morning or next week, where we're going to be announcing someone else as well. So thanks very much, everyone. Appreciate the support as always, and we'll see you in the very near future.